The night shift waitress saw the mysterious man enter the empty restaurant bleeding, and all her instincts screamed for her to call the authorities. But there was something in his eyes, a silent plea that made her make a split-second decision that would change her life forever. She hid him. She lied to the armed men who came looking. And when he finally looked at her and whispered the only 2 words he would say that night, "Don't speak," she had no idea she was about to become the only person the most dangerous crime boss in the city would trust with his life. But before I tell you how she ended up falling in love with the man she saved, how she became the queen of an empire she never knew existed, you need to understand who Lila Reyes was before that night that changed everything. The green neon sign of Charlie's Diner buzzed too loud, as it always did after 10 at night, casting a sickly light over the faces of the few customers who still remained on that rainy Wednesday in March. Lila Reyes wiped the same counter for the 5th time in 10 minutes, her eyes red from exhaustion, her feet aching inside the cheap sneakers she should have replaced 3 months ago. It was 11:42 at night, and she had 1 more hour and 18 minutes until her shift ended. 1 more hour and 18 minutes until she could drag her exhausted body to the night bus that would take her to her tiny apartment where her 5-year-old daughter was sleeping under the care of the elderly neighbor who charged too much but was the only one Lila could afford. 23 years old. Lila was only 23, but she felt like she had lived 3 entire lifetimes. Single mother at 18, abandoned by her boyfriend as soon as he found out about the pregnancy, working 2 jobs to keep a roof over their heads and food on the table. The restaurant paid the basic bills, barely, but it was the night shift at the laundromat that really kept the lights on. 4 hours of sleep a night. If she was lucky, cold coffee in the morning because there was no time to heat it up, and dreams she had buried so deep that sometimes she forgot she ever had them. She wanted to be a nurse once. She had even started classes at community college, studying late at night after Emma, her daughter, fell asleep, imagining a future where she wore scrubs instead of a greasy restaurant uniform, where she helped people instead of just serving greasy fries and watery coffee. But then daycare raised their prices, and the landlord raised the rent. And suddenly there was no money for textbooks, no time for classes, no room for dreams, when survival consumed every second of every day. But Lila didn't allow herself to think about that most of the time. Didn't allow herself to mourn the life she could have had, because mourning didn't pay bills, and self-pity didn't feed her daughter. So she wiped counters and served coffee, and smiled at customers who never really saw her, who looked through her as if she were just part of the decor, as invisible as the cracked vinyl chairs and the stained checkered floor. And if sometimes tears burned her eyes when she was alone in the tiny employee bathroom, if sometimes she caught herself staring out the dirty window wondering if this was really all there was to her life, well, she swallowed those emotions and went back to work because there was no other choice. The restaurant was almost empty now, only 3 tables occupied. 2 truck drivers in the corner devouring cherry pie and black coffee, talking in low voices about routes and deliveries. A lonely woman near the window with deep dark circles and hands trembling slightly around her tea mug, clearly battling her own demons. And then there was the man at the counter, the one Lila was carefully not looking at, the one who made every survival instinct she had developed growing up on the street scream danger. He had come in about an hour ago, ordering only water, and had been sitting there ever since, the hood of his dark sweatshirt pulled low over his face, his shoulders tense in a way that suggested he was waiting for something, or running from something. Lila had learned early to recognize trouble, had developed a 6th sense for people who were dangerous or in danger, and this man was definitely one or the other, or both. Part of her wanted to ask him to leave, but the bigger part, the part that had grown up with too much empathy for her own good, wondered what story had brought him here. What kind of pain was hidden under that hood? If you're wondering why I'm telling you all these details about Lila's life, why it matters that she was tired and broke and just trying to survive, it's because you need to understand exactly what she was risking when she made the decision she made. Pause here and leave a like if you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever worked so hard that you forgot what it was like to have energy to dream, because Lila represents millions of people who are just trying to get through the day, and what she's about to do is going to change everything. Lila was filling the coffee machine, her back to the restaurant, when she heard it. The bell above the door jingling, then voices, hard and urgent, and full of barely disguised threat. She turned and felt her blood freeze. 4 men had entered, all wearing black leather jackets, all with the posture and expressions of people who weren't here to order coffee. The leader was tall and muscular, with a scar running from temple to jaw, and when he spoke, his voice carried the kind of authority that came from never being questioned. "We're looking for someone," he said, and it wasn't a request. Man, about 6 feet tall, dark hair, probably injured. He may have come in here in the last 2 hours. Anyone seen anyone like that? The restaurant went completely silent. The truck drivers looked down at their pies, suddenly very interested in their desserts. The lonely woman shrank in, her seat obviously wanting to disappear. And the man at the counter, the one with the hood pulled low, went completely still. So still, he could have been a statue. The manager, a middle-aged man named Frank, who usually disappeared into the office for most of the shift, came stumbling out of the kitchen, wiping his hands on his dirty apron. "Haven't seen anyone like that," he said quickly, his voice trembling only slightly. "It's been quiet tonight, just the usual customers." The scarred man's eyes narrowed, scanning the restaurant with the precision of a predator looking for prey. His gaze passed over the truck drivers, the lonely woman, and then landed on the man at the counter. Lila saw the exact moment recognition flashed across his face, saw when his hand started to move towards something hidden under his jacket. And then, without thinking, without calculating the cost, Lila moved. She crossed the space between her and the hooded man in 3 quick steps, wrapped her arms around him from behind and pressed her face against his shoulder, as if they were in an intimate embrace. "Honey," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear, her voice trembling but firm, "I was wondering where you were. You promised to pick me up an hour ago." Her hands moved to his front, and she could feel something sticky and warm under his sweatshirt. Blood, she realized with growing horror. He was bleeding, but she forced her face to remain calm, forced a smile as she looked at the men with the scar. "Sorry about my boyfriend," she continued, her mind racing to invent a story that sounded plausible. "He works construction, double shift today, probably fell on the job site again. Always coming home all banged up." For a long, terrifying moment, the scarred man just stared at them, his eyes moving between Lila and the hooded man with obvious suspicion. Lila forced herself to keep smiling, forced her body to relax as if she wasn't terrified, as if her heart wasn't beating so hard she was sure. Everyone could hear it. Then the hooded man moved, slowly raising a hand to cover Lila's where it rested on his chest, and she felt how he was trembling, felt the tension in every muscle of his body. "Sorry, babe," he muttered, his voice hoarse and low, distorted by pain or fear or both. "Got stuck at work. Let's go home now." He started to stand, and Lila had to fight the urge to recoil when she saw how much blood had soaked the left side of his sweatshirt, a dark and growing stain that couldn't be from anything good. The scarred man stepped forward, blocking their path to the door. "Your boyfriend," he repeated, and there was obvious disbelief in his tone. "How convenient." "Yes," Lila said, forcing irritation into her voice as if she was annoyed at being questioned. "My boyfriend. We've been together for 2 years. We live together on Oak Street. We have a 5-year-old daughter named Emma who's waiting for Daddy to come home. Now, if you don't mind, it's past her bedtime and I really need to go." She didn't know where the words were coming from, didn't know how she was keeping her voice steady when every part of her was screaming, "Danger, run, save yourself." But there was something about the way the hooded man was trembling, something about the silent desperation she could feel emanating from him, that made her continue, that made her double down on this lie even when she knew it could cost her life. The scarred man studied them for another long moment, then slowly, reluctantly, stepped aside. "All right," he said, but his eyes remained cold, suspicious. "But if I find out you're lying," he looked directly at Lila, "if I find out you're protecting who I think you're protecting, you're going to regret it. You and your 5-year-old daughter." The threat hung in the air like poisonous smoke. Lila forced a nod, then gently guided the hooded man toward the door, aware of how he was leaning on her, of how each step seemed to cost him. They walked out into the rainy night, and Lila didn't let out her breath until they were half a block away, until the restaurant lights were just a distant glow behind them. Then the man stumbled and she caught him, her small body somehow supporting his weight when he started to fall. "Wait," she whispered urgently. "Just wait. I need to get you somewhere safe." Her apartment was only 6 blocks away, and somehow, not allowing herself to think about the absolute insanity of what she was doing, Lila half-dragged, half-carried this bleeding stranger through the empty, rainy streets to her building, up the 3 flights of stairs to her tiny apartment. Unlocking the door with trembling hands, Mrs. Chun, her elderly neighbor who was watching Emma, came out of the bedroom with wide eyes of shock at seeing Lila supporting a blood-covered man. Lila, what? She started, but Lila interrupted her. Please, Mrs. Chun, Lila said desperately. Please, can you take Emma to your apartment tonight? I'll explain tomorrow, I promise, but please, get her out of here now. Mrs. Chun hesitated only a moment, then nodded, picked up still sleeping Emma from the bed and left quickly, muttering something in Mandarin that was probably prayers or curses or both. And then Lila was alone with this stranger, this man she had saved without knowing who he was or what he had done. And the absolute reality of her situation finally hit her. She had lied to dangerous men, had taken a bleeding fugitive to her apartment where her daughter slept, had risked everything, her safety, Emma's future, her own life, for someone she didn't even know. What have I done? She whispered. But then the man groaned in pain, and her caregiver instincts took over. She helped him to the couch, the one she had found on the curb and refurbished because she couldn't afford a new one, and gently helped him remove his bloodied sweatshirt. What she saw underneath made her stomach turn. 3 wounds, one on the shoulder, one on the ribs, and one dangerously close to his stomach. Still bleeding, still open, needing stitches she didn't know how to give. But she had taken some first aid courses when she was trying to be a nurse. So she did what she could, cleaning the wounds with hydrogen peroxide that made him flinch and bite back a moan, pressing gauze against the worst bleeding, bandaging his torso with strips torn from clean sheets because that was all she had. And through it all, he didn't say a word. Just lay there, his eyes closed, his jaw clenched in pain, his body trembling from shock or blood loss or both. It was only when Lila finally finished, when she sat back on her heels, her hands covered in his blood, that his eyes finally opened and met hers. And Lila felt like she had been struck by lightning, because even through the pain, even through the obvious exhaustion, those eyes were the most intense things she had ever seen. Dark as midnight, piercing as lasers, full of intelligence and danger and something else she couldn't name. Don't speak, he whispered, his voice rough as broken glass. To anyone. About me. About tonight. Don't speak. And then his eyes rolled back and he passed out, leaving Lila alone in her blood-stained apartment, with an unconscious stranger on her couch, and the terrible realization that her life would never be the same. Comment now telling me what you would do in this situation. Would you have saved him? Or would you have protected yourself and let the men take him? Because Lila just crossed a line that can't be uncrossed, and what happens next will test everything she thinks she knows about right and wrong. Lila didn't sleep that night. How could she? She sat in her stained kitchen chair, watching the stranger sleep on her couch, monitoring his breathing, checking his bandages every 15 minutes to make sure he wasn't bleeding again. She should be afraid, she knew. Should be terrified of having a dangerous and injured man in her apartment, a man that clearly even more dangerous men were looking. FOR. But instead, all she felt was a strange sense of purpose, as if after years of just existing, just surviving, she had finally done something that mattered, something brave, something that meant something. As the gray morning light began to filter through her thin curtains, the man finally stirred. His eyes blinked open, immediately alert despite the obvious pain that crossed his face when he tried to sit up. Lila was at his side instantly, her hands gently pushing him back down. Don't move. Yet, she said softly, you lost a lot of blood. You need to rest. He studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes traveling over her face as if memorizing every feature. Why? He finally asked, his voice still hoarse but stronger than the night before. Why did you do that? Why did you save me? Lila sat back, rubbing her tired eyes. Honestly, I don't know. She struggled for the right words. You looked like you needed help. And I couldn't just stand there and watch you get hurt or worse. You don't know who I am, he said, and there was something like warning in his tone. Don't know what I did, why those men were looking for me. I could be a monster, could be dangerous. Lila met his gaze steadily. Are you dangerous? To me? To my daughter? He was silent for so long she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, his voice so low she almost didn't hear, No, never to you. You saved me when you had no reason to, when doing so could have cost you everything. That means something. In my world, that means everything. What world is that? Lila asked, though she could guess, could piece together from the men looking for him, from the wounds that looked too deliberate to be an accident, from the way he spoke about loyalty and debts as if they were currency. The man closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them again, there was decision there, as if he had made some kind of choice. My name is Dominic Santoro, he said, and Lila saw how he watched her face for recognition. He hesitated, then seemed to decide on the truth. I run businesses in the east part of the city. Businesses that aren't always completely legal. And recently, someone decided they wanted to take over those businesses, and they're willing to eliminate me to get it. Lila felt her stomach sink even as part of her had guessed exactly this. She swallowed hard. You're what, exactly? A criminal? A boss? Dominic smiled, and it was bitter and tired. Those are just words, he said. I do what I need to survive, to protect what's mine, to keep the people who depend on me safe. Does that make me a monster? Maybe. But the world isn't black and white, miss. He realized he didn't know her name. Reyes. Lila provided automatically. Lila Reyes. And I know the world isn't black and white. I know better than most. Silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken implications. Finally, Dominic spoke again. You need to know what you risked by saving me. Those men from last night worked for Marco Valente, and he's not going to stop looking for me. And if he finds out you helped me, that you lied to him, he'll come after you, after your daughter. You need to understand the seriousness of this. I understand, Lila said, though her voice trembled slightly. So what do we do now? Dominic tried to sit up again, and this time Lila helped him, stacking pillows behind him. Now, he said, you let me get out of here before I bring more trouble to your door. I have people, places I can go. You've already done more than enough. You can't even stand, Lila pointed out. You'll bleed to death before you reach the end of the hallway. Dominic, she tested his name, savoring the syllables. You need to stay here until you're strong enough to leave safely. And we both know that's going to take at least a few days. You don't know what you're offering, he said. But Lila could see the hope flashing in his eyes, could see how his body relaxed slightly in relief. I know exactly what I'm offering, she responded. A safe place to heal. Nothing more, nothing less. Dominic studied her for a long moment, then slowly nodded. All right, but just until I can walk without passing out. And Lila, he reached out and took her hand, his fingers warm despite everything he had been through. I'll pay this debt. Somehow, some way, I'll make this right for you. The next 3 days were the strangest of Lila's life. She called in sick to work, something she had never done before, and spent her days caring for Dominic while Emma stayed with Mrs. Chun, who asked questions but accepted Lila's story that he was an old friend who needed help. Lila cleaned his wounds, changed his bandages, forced him to eat the soup she made with the limited ingredients in her nearly empty fridge. And slowly, very slowly, Dominic began to heal. But more than that, they began to talk. Real conversations, not just small talk, but deep and honest conversations about lives and choices and regrets. Dominic told her about growing up on the streets, about having to fight for every inch of respect, about building an empire through strength and intelligence and ruthlessness when necessary. But he also told about the people he protected, the legitimate businesses he ran as a front, but that actually employed hundreds, the schools and hospitals he secretly funded in neighborhoods nobody else cared about. And Lila told him about Emma, about the father who ran away, about dreams of being a nurse she had to give up, about working until her bones ached just to pay for an apartment that barely deserved the name. She told about loneliness, about feeling invisible, about wondering if this was really all life had to offer. And Dominic listened, really listened, in a way that no one had listened to her in years. And when he looked at her, she didn't feel invisible at all. She felt seen, really seen, maybe for the first time in her life. It was on the third night that everything changed again. Emma finally came home, Mrs. Chun, having exhausted her excuses to keep her longer, and Lila was terrified about how her daughter would react to the stranger on their couch. But Emma, with the simple acceptance of children, just looked at Dominic with curiosity and asked, "Are you hurt?" Dominic, whom Lila had seen discuss business on the phone with a coldness that made her blood chill, softened completely when looking at the girl. "I am," he said gently. "But your mommy is helping me get better. She's very nice. Mommy is the best." Emma agreed seriously. "She takes care of everybody." She looked at Dominic with the same dark eyes as her mother. "Are you Mommy's friend?" "I am," Dominic said, and he looked at Lila when he said it, something passing between them that made her heart skip a beat. "I'm a very, very good friend of your Mommy's." And Emma, satisfied with that answer, nestled beside him on the couch and began talking about her school, her friends, her favorite stuffed animal, completely unafraid of this man that grown and dangerous men feared. Lila watched the interaction, saw how gentle Dominic was with Emma, how he actually paid attention to what she said, how he treated her as if her words mattered, and something that had been carefully locked in her chest, something she had promised herself she would never feel again after Emma's father left, began to melt. No, she thought desperately. I can't fall in love with him. He's dangerous. He's temporary. He'll leave as soon as he's healed, and I'll never see him again. I can't do this to myself. Can't do this to Emma. But the heart doesn't listen to logic, and Lila was beginning to realize it was already too late for warnings. That night, after Emma finally fell asleep in the bed that Lila insisted she take while Lila slept in the chair, Dominic called her to the couch. Sit with me, he said softly, and Lila obeyed, aware of how close her body was to his, of how she could feel his heat even through the space between them. Lila, he began, then stopped, as if struggling with the right words. I need to say something, he finally continued, and you need to hear me out before you decide I'm crazy. For the last 3 days, you've given me something I didn't know I needed. Not just your help, but your company, your kindness, you. And your daughter, God, your daughter is perfect, and the way you love her, the way you sacrifice everything for her, is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And I know I have no right. I know we just met. I know you must think I'm head injured or delirious or both, but I need to say this. I've fallen in love with you, Lila Reyes. Completely and irrevocably fallen in love with you. Kala felt like she couldn't breathe, like the whole world had stopped spinning. You can't, she whispered. You barely know me. I know you enough, Dominic said, reaching to take her hand. I know you're brave and kind and stronger than anyone I've ever met. I know you risked everything to save a stranger. I know you work until you're ready to drop just to give your daughter a better life. I know you deserve everything, every good thing this world can offer, and I want to be the person who gives that to you. This is crazy, Lila said, but she didn't pull her hand away. You're going to leave as soon as you're healed. You have a life, a business, people who need you, and I have Emma to think about. I can't just, she struggled for words, can't just fall into your arms like some idiotic romance heroine. Then don't fall, Dominic said, pulling her gently closer. Stay here with me, and let's figure this out together. Because I'm not leaving, Lila. Not without you. Not without Emma. You two are mine now. Understand? And I protect what's mine. And then he was kissing her, and it was gentle and desperate and full of promise, and Lila felt years of loneliness and fear and exhaustion melt under the heat of that kiss. When they finally separated, both breathing hard, she whispered, This is insane. This is the most insane thing I've ever done. Welcome to my world, Dominic said, with a smile that transformed his entire face, and Lila realized she was lost, completely and absolutely lost. Subscribe to Karma Stories now if you want to see where this impossible story goes, because it's about to get a lot more complicated. But reality hit hard the next morning when someone knocked on Lila's door with such force that the hinges shook. Dominic was on his feet instantly, despite the obvious pain that crossed his face, moving to stand between Lila and the door. Don't open it, he whispered urgently, but then a voice came from the other side, a voice that Lila recognized with growing dread. Miss Reyes, said the scarred man from the restaurant. I know you're in there, and I know you're hiding something. Open the door now, or I'll break it down. Lila looked at Dominic, saw the tension in his body, the way he was clearly trying to calculate his chances of fighting even injured, and made a decision. She approached the door, and unlocked it, opening just a crack. What do you want? She asked, forcing irritation into her voice. It's 6 a.m. I have a 5-year-old daughter trying to sleep. The scarred man pushed the door completely open, entering her apartment as if he owned the place, 3 other men behind him. My associates and I have been thinking about that night at the restaurant, he said, his eyes scanning the apartment. About how convenient it was that your boyfriend showed up right when we were looking for someone. About how he was wearing a hood even though he was inside. About how eager you were to get us out of there. He started walking around the small apartment, opening cabinets, checking behind furniture. And Lila had to fight the urge to look at the bathroom where Dominic had hidden at the last second. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, her voice steady even though her hands were trembling. I told you the truth. That was my boyfriend. He works construction. He was tired and hurt from a long day. That's it. Show me, the scarred man said suddenly, turning to face her. Your boyfriend. Call him. Tell him to come here now. Prove he's real. Lila's heart stopped. She didn't have a boyfriend, obviously. Didn't have anyone she could call to make this lie work. But then she remembered Dominic had left his phone on the coffee table, a phone he had used yesterday to make some low-voiced calls while Emma was at school. She picked it up, her hands only slightly trembling, and pretended to dial a number. The call was answered immediately, but Lila said nothing, just acted as if she was having a conversation. "Hey, baby," she said, forcing affection into her voice. "Sorry to wake you, but there are some men here who want to meet you. Can you come over?" She paused as if listening to a response. "Okay, see you in 20 minutes. Love you." She hung up and faced the scarred man defiantly. "Satisfied? He's coming. You can wait, or you can leave and stop bothering me." "And my daughter." The scarred man studied her for a long moment, then smiled, and it was cold as ice. "We'll wait." The next 20 minutes were the longest of Lila's life. She sat in her kitchen chair, forcing herself to appear calm while the men wandered around her apartment. While Emma woke up and started crying in the bedroom, seeing strangers in their home, while Lila wondered desperately how Dominic was going to get out of the bathroom without being seen, how he would know he needed to show up as her imaginary boyfriend, how either of them was going to survive this. And then, exactly 20 minutes later, there was another knock on the door. Lila opened it, and her breath caught, because there was Dominic, but not the injured and pale Dominic who had been hiding in her bathroom. This Dominic was wearing an expensive suit, his hair combed back, his wounds somehow hidden under the clothes, and he looked every inch the powerful boss he really was. He looked into Lila's eyes, and she saw the question there, the confirmation that he was doing the right thing. She nodded almost imperceptibly, then threw herself into his arms. "Baby," she said, loud enough for the men inside to hear. "These men wanted to meet you. She hesitated. "They're asking strange questions." Dominic kissed her softly, then looked over her shoulder at the scarred man, and his expression changed to something cold and dangerous. "Marco," he said, his voice low and deadly, "what a pleasure. You're terrorizing my family now? That's a new low, even for you." The scarred man, Marco, went completely still, his face going pale. "Santoro," he whispered. But we were looking, we thought." He looked between Dominic and Lila, his confusion obvious. "You were looking for me?" Dominic asked, taking a step into her apartment, forcing Marco to back up. "Well, you found me. Though I'm not sure what you hope to accomplish by invading my woman's apartment, scaring my stepdaughter." He moved closer, and despite being clearly outnumbered, there was something so threatening in his posture that the other men instinctively backed away. "My woman and I have been keeping our relationship private for obvious reasons," he continued. "My business is dangerous, and I wanted to keep her and little Emma safe. But now that you've invaded our privacy, I guess the cat's out of the bag." "You were at the restaurant that night," Marco accused, finding his voice. "We knew you'd been hit, knew you were injured." "I was hit," Dominic confirmed. "And thank God I came here instead of one of my usual spots. Lila took out the bullet, bandaged me up, saved me. My woman is a hero, Marco, something you'd never understand." Marco looked between them, clearly trying to decide whether to believe this story. The tension in the room was so thick, Lila could feel it in the air, could see how the other men were positioning their hands near hidden weapons, could feel how close they all were to violence. Then Emma came stumbling out of the bedroom, rubbing her sleepy eyes, and went straight to Dominic, raising her arms in a universal request to be picked up. Dominic lifted her without hesitation, despite how it must have hurt his wounds, and Emma nestled her head against his shoulder, murmuring something about bad men going away. In that simple image of a feared boss holding a small child who clearly trusted him completely was what finally convinced Marco. His face closed off, and he gestured for his men to back down. "My apologies," he said stiffly. "I didn't know. Never thought." He shook his head. "We'll get out of your way." "But Santoro?" He paused at the door. "We're still in the middle of a war. You know that. And now that I know about your family, well, they become part of that war, whether you want them to or not." The threat was clear, and Lila saw how Dominic's jaw tightened, how his arms tightened protectively around Emma. "If you or any of yours get within a mile of them," Dominic said quietly, "there won't be a place on earth where you can hide from me. Understood?" Marco smiled, but there was no humor in it. "We'll see," he said, and then he was gone, his men following, leaving Lila and Dominic and Emma alone in an apartment that somehow felt smaller, more vulnerable than ever. Dominic gently put Emma back to bed, told her a story until she fell back asleep, then returned to where Lila was standing by the window, watching the street below with obvious fear. She turned when she heard him approach, tears streaming down her face. "What have I done?" she whispered. "What have I done to us? to Emma. She's in danger now because of me. Because of me. Dominic pulled her into his arms, holding her tight while she cried. No, he said firmly. She's in danger because of me. Because of who I am, what I've done. But Lila, he held her face between his hands, forcing her to look at him. I'm going to protect you both. With every resource I have, with every man loyal to me, with my own life if necessary. You're mine now, my family, and nobody touches my family. But how? Lila asked desperately. How can you protect us when they know where we live, when they can come back any time? Dominic was silent for a moment, then said, You'll move. To my house. Today. Now. I have security, an entire system built to keep people safe. And you'll stay there, you and Emma, until I settle this with Marco once and for all. Lila backed away, shaking her head. I can't just abandon my life, my job, my apartment. Your job, where you barely earn enough to pay rent? Dominic said gently. Your apartment that's falling apart around you? Lila, you deserve better. Emma deserves better. Let me give that to you, please. And because Lila was terrified and exhausted and secretly had wished for a way out of this existence that barely deserved to be called a life, she nodded. Okay, she whispered. Okay. They packed the few possessions Lila had in less than an hour. Clothes for her and Emma, some toys, the photos that documented Emma's short life. Everything fit into 3 suitcases. A depressing realization of how little she had accumulated in 23 years of life. Mrs. Chun came to say goodbye to them, tears in her eyes, making Lila promise she would call, that she would keep Emma safe, that she wouldn't forget her. And then they were in a car, not an obvious limousine, but a dark-windowed SUV with 2 guards in front, driving through the city to a neighborhood Lila had only seen in magazines. The houses here were mansions, each sitting on acres of perfectly landscaped grounds, hidden behind tall gates and even taller walls. They stopped in front of iron gates that opened automatically, revealing a driveway that seemed endless, winding through gardens that looked like something out of a fairy tale. And then there it was, Dominic's house. No, Lila corrected mentally. Not a house, an estate. 3 stories of stone and glass and opulence that made her tiny apartment look like a shoebox in comparison. Fountains spat water in graceful arcs. A garage the size of her entire building housed cars that were probably worth more than she would earn in 10 lifetimes. And everywhere, absolutely everywhere, there were men in dark suits, watching, waiting, guarding. Emma pressed her face against the window, her eyes wide as saucers. Mommy, she whispered in awe, it's like a castle. It is, Lila agreed, her stomach tight with apprehension. It's like a castle. But the question she didn't say out loud, the question that terrified her, was, were they guests in this castle, or prisoners? And would there be any difference in the end? Share this video if you're seeing how Lila's life is changing completely. Because the next chapter is where she learns exactly what it means to be part of Dominic's world. The front door opened before they could knock, revealing a middle-aged woman with dark hair, pulled in an elegant bun, and a navy silk dress that probably cost more than 3 months of Lila's rent. Mr. Santoro, she said, her eyes flashing briefly to Lila and Emma before returning to Dominic. Your suite is ready, as requested. Thank you, Rosa, Dominic said warmly. Rosa, these are Lila and Emma Reyes. They'll be staying with us indefinitely. Please make sure they have everything they need. Rosa studied Lila with an intensity that made her want to shrink, then slowly nodded. Of course, sir. Ladies, please follow me. I'll show you your rooms. Rooms, plural. Lila followed Rosa through an entrance. Hall so large it echoed, up a marble staircase that had probably been imported from Italy, through corridors lined with art she had only seen in museums. They finally stopped in front of a set of double doors that Rosa opened with a flourish. Your suite, miss, she said, and stepped aside. Lila entered and felt her jaw drop. The suite was bigger than her entire old apartment. There was a living room with soft leather sofas and a real fireplace. A bedroom with a king-size bed covered in sheets. That felt like silk under her fingers. A bathroom with a tub so large Emma could swim in it, and a shower that had more jets than she could count. And through another door, a smaller room decorated in pink and white with a princess castle-shaped bed that made Emma scream with joy. For me, Mommy? She asked, her eyes shining. This bed is really for me? It is, sweetie, Lila said, her voice trembling. It's all yours. Emma threw herself on the bed, rolling in the fluffy blankets, laughing in a way. that Lila hadn't heard her laugh in a long time without the shadow of worry that usually hovered around her young eyes. And Lila realized that in all her attempts to give Emma a good life, she had failed to give her what she needed most: the freedom to simply be a child, to not worry if there would be enough food or if the heat would work or if mommy would be too tired to play. Dominic appeared in the doorway, leaning on the frame, and Lila could see how the trip here had exhausted him, how the pain was written in every line of his face, even though he tried to hide it. "You need to rest," she said, returning to the caregiver mode that had become second nature in the last days. "Let me check your bandages. Make sure you haven't reopened anything." "In a minute," he said, his dark eyes fixed on her face. "First, we need to talk. About rules, about expectations, about how this is going to work." Lila felt her stomach tighten again. Here it came, the list of how she should behave. What freedoms she was giving up by coming here, how she had essentially become his property by accepting his protection. But then Dominic said, "Rule number 1, you're not my prisoner. You're my guest, he hesitated. "My girlfriend, if you still want to be after seeing all this. You're free to come and go as you wish, though I ask that you take security with you until the situation with Marco is resolved. Rule number 2, this is your home now. Treat it as such. Change anything you don't like, ask Rosa for. Anything you or Emma need, don't feel like you need to walk on eggshells." He moved away from the frame, crossing the space until he was standing in front of her, so close she could feel his heat, could see the golden flecks in his dark eyes. "Rule number 3, he said softly, "and this is the most important one, so listen carefully. You saved me when I had no right to expect salvation. You risked everything, your safety, your daughter's future, for a stranger you had no reason to trust. That creates a debt, Lila. A debt I'm going to spend the rest of my life repaying. And part of repaying that debt means respecting you, honoring your choices, never making you feel like you're less than the incredible woman you are." Lila felt tears burn her eyes. "You don't owe me anything," she whispered. "I did what any decent person would do. Any decent person would have called the police," Dominic said, or turned around and pretended not to see. "But you didn't do either of those things. You lied to dangerous men. You took me into your home. You took care of me. You gave me, for the first time in years, hope that there was still kindness in the world, that I was more than just the monster everyone sees me as. And then you gave me even more when you introduced me to Emma, when you let me see what it's like to have a real family." He reached out and gently wiped the tears from her face. "So yes, Lila Reyes, I owe you everything, and I'm going to spend every day proving that you made the right decision, trusting me." The next 2 weeks were surreal. Lila slowly adjusted to life on the estate, learning the guards' names, accepting Rosa's presence, who turned out to be much warmer under her professional exterior. Emma flourished in ways that broke and filled Lila's heart, playing in the gardens, learning to swim in the heated pool, laughing constantly in a way she never could in the small apartment where the walls were thin and neighbors complained about any noise. And Dominic was a revelation. When his wounds began to heal, when he was able to move without pain, he showed Lila his world. Not the criminal world, not the dark side that had made his name synonymous with fear, but the person he was underneath all that. He took her to dinners at restaurants so expensive that Lila didn't dare look at the prices on the menu. He took her on nighttime drives through the city in his ridiculously expensive cars, showing her places she never knew existed. He bought clothes for her and Emma, not condescendingly, but because he genuinely wanted to give them beautiful things. And he talked to her, really talked, about his dreams and fears and hopes for the future. He told about wanting to get out of the criminal business, about having enough money to last 10 lifetimes and not knowing why he was still risking everything, about feeling trapped in a life he had chosen at 16 and not knowing how to get out of it. And Lila listened, offered perspective, suggested paths he hadn't considered, and slowly, very slowly, they began to build something real, something deep, something that scared Lila with its intensity but that she couldn't deny anymore. But then everything exploded. It was a Tuesday, Lila would remember later. A perfectly normal Tuesday where Emma was at the expensive private school Dominic had enrolled her in, where Lila was in the library reading, where everything seemed peaceful and calm. And then Rosa came running in, her face pale, her hands shaking. "Miss Lila," she said, her voice failing. "They took Emma. They grabbed her when she was leaving school. There was a note. They say that if Mr. Santoro wants to see her again, he needs to turn himself in to Marco Valente by midnight tonight." Lila's world narrowed to a single point. Emma, her daughter, her baby, in the hands of men who wouldn't hesitate to hurt her to get what they wanted. She was up and running before even thinking, screaming for Dominic, finding him in his office, already on his phone, already mobilizing his men, his face carved in lines of rage so pure it was terrifying to see. "I'll find her," he said the moment he saw her, crossing the space to pull her into his arms. "I swear on everything that's sacred, Lila, I'll bring our girl home." Our girl. He had said our girl. And even through the panic, through the absolute terror, Lila felt something warm in her chest. "I'm going with you," she said, but Dominic shook his head. "Too dangerous. You stay here." "Where you're safe while She's my daughter," Lila screamed, pushing him away. "My daughter who's in danger because of you, because of your world, because I made the mistake of falling in love with you. So you're not leaving me here waiting and wondering. I'm going, and you can't stop me." Dominic studied her for a long moment, and then something changed in his expression, softened just at the edges. "All right," he said quietly. "You come, but stay close to me. Do exactly what I say. And if I tell you to run, you run and don't look back. Understood?" Lila nodded, even knowing she would never run, never leave Emma, no matter what happened. They prepared for war. Dominic put on a bulletproof vest, gave one to Lila too, gathered 20 of his best men. And then they waited, because Marco's note had included instructions for where the meeting would happen. An abandoned warehouse at the docks that had been the site of more than one bad deal in the past. But Dominic wasn't stupid, and he didn't play by anyone else's rules. He sent reconnaissance teams hours earlier, mapping every entrance and exit, identifying where Marco's men were positioned, looking for where Emma was being held. And when it was finally time to go, when the clock struck 11:30, giving them only 30 minutes before Marco's deadline, Dominic turned to Lila and said, "No matter what happens tonight, no matter how this ends, I need you to know something. I love you. I love Emma. You two are the best things that ever happened to me, and I would die happy knowing I had even a few weeks with you." "Don't talk like that," Lila whispered, clutching his shirt. "You're not going to die. We're going to get Emma, and we're all going home, and we're going to be a real family. I promise." And then they were moving, crossing the city in a convoy of dark-windowed SUVs, each filled with men armed to the teeth and willing to kill or die for their boss. They stopped 3 blocks from the warehouse, and Dominic gathered his men, giving final orders, positioning people where they needed to be. And then he looked at Lila, and she saw fear in his eyes for the first time. Fear not for himself, but for her, for Emma, for everything he was about to risk. "Ready?" he asked, and Lila nodded, even though she was further from ready than she'd ever been in her life. They approached the warehouse from 3 different sides, Dominic's men moving with the practiced precision of soldiers. Marco was waiting for them at the main entrance, with Emma standing beside him, her little hand held in his, in a way that made Lila's vision go red with rage. Her daughter was pale, scared, but whole, and when Emma saw Lila, she screamed "Mommy" and tried to run, but Marco held her firm. "Ah, Marco said, wagging a finger as if scolding a naughty child. "First we talk business, then you get your little girl." Dominic stepped forward, with Lila right behind him, aware of how Marco's men surrounded them, of how they were outnumbered at least 2 to 1. "What do you want, Marco?" Dominic asked, his voice deadly calm. "I want everything," Marco said simply. "Your territory, your businesses, your reputation. I want you out of the way so I can finally take the place that should be mine. So here's the deal. You announce your retirement, hand control over to me, and I let you live. You, your girlfriend, and the annoying kid can go somewhere far away and live in peace. Refuse, and well," he looked at Emma significantly, "accidents happen too. Children all the time. Let her go first," Dominic said. "The child has nothing to do with this. She walks out, then we negotiate." Marco laughed, a hard sound without humor. "You think I'm an idiot? The kid is my only leverage. She stays until we have a deal." And then everything exploded into chaos. Because Dominic hadn't come here to negotiate, and his reconnaissance teams had found exactly what he expected, that Marco was arrogant, that he had positioned his men poorly, that there were holes in his security big enough to drive a truck through. Gunshots echoed from 3 different directions as Dominic's men opened fire on Marcos's positions, bringing instant chaos. Marco let go of Emma and dove for cover, shouting orders that were lost in the deafening noise. And Lila ran faster than she'd ever run in her life, straight to where Emma was frozen with fear in the middle of it all. She grabbed her daughter and held her tight, shielding her with her body as she ran back to where Dominic was crouched behind a car, his own gun drawn, providing covering fire. "Run!" he shouted to Lila. "Take Emma and get out of here now." "No!" Lila shouted back. And then she saw the shooter on the balcony above them, saw how he was aiming at Dominic, saw how Dominic hadn't even noticed because he was too focused on protecting her and Emma, and Lila, who had never held a gun in her life, who knew nothing about violence beyond what she had seen in movies, moved purely on instinct. She saw the gun lying near her feet, left by one of Dominic's men who had been hit. She picked it up, heavy and strange in her hands, and aimed as best she could and pulled the trigger. The recoil nearly broke her wrist, and the bullet flew wide of its mark. But it was close enough to make the shooter dive for cover, close enough to give Dominic's men time to take him out. And Dominic turned, saw what she had done, and there was something like admiration mixed with horror in his eyes. "You could have been killed," he shouted. But then he was kissing her, hard and desperate, and Lila knew he was thanking her, was angry at her, was terrified for her, all at the same time. The battle lasted less than 10 minutes, but felt like a lifetime. When the smoke finally cleared, when the final gunshot finally silenced, Marco's men were dead or fleeing, and Marco was kneeling on the ground with 3 guns pointed at his head. Dominic approached slowly, each step deliberate, and when he spoke, his voice carried a death sentence. "You touched my family," he said. "You scared my daughter, and now you're going to pay for it." "Don't do it," Lila said suddenly, still holding Emma tight, shielding her daughter's eyes. "Not in front of her. Don't make her witness something that will haunt her like you were haunted." Dominic froze, then slowly lowered his gun. "You're right," he said. "She shouldn't see this." He turned to his men. "Take him. You know what to do." And then he was coming back to them, pulling both into his arms, holding them like he would never let go. "Let's go home," he whispered. "Let's go home and never talk about tonight again." And they did. They went back to the estate, put Emma to bed with a happy story and extra kisses. And then Lila and Dominic sat in his room, just holding each other as the sun slowly rose on the horizon. "I can't do this," Lila finally said, her voice small. "Can't live in this world where my daughter can be kidnapped, where people shoot at people, where violence is just part of a normal day. Emma deserves better." "I know," Dominic said, and there was defeat in his voice. "I know she deserves. You both deserve. That's why I'm getting out." Lila lifted her head from his shoulder, studying his face. "What? I'm getting out?" Dominic repeated. "Of the business, of crime, of everything. I have enough money for 10 lifetimes, legitimate investments that can sustain us. Marco was the only person really challenging my control, and now he's gone. I can hand my territory over to my second-in-command, announce I'm retiring, and actually mean it this time." "You would do that?" Lila whispered. "For us? For me and Emma?" "I would do anything for you," Dominic said, holding her face between his hands. "Anything, Lila. Because you gave me something I thought I'd lost forever. Hope. Hope that I can be more than just a criminal, that I can have a real family, that I can build a life that isn't based on fear and violence. So yes, I'm getting out, and we'll start over. The 3 of us somewhere new where nobody knows my name, where Emma can grow up without having to look over her shoulder." Tears streamed down Lila's face, but this time they were from relief, from joy, from hope. "I love you," she whispered. "God help me, Dominic Santoro, but I love you." "I love you too," he whispered back, and then they were kissing. And it was different from all the kisses before because this one was sealing a promise, was committing them to a future neither was sure they could have, but both were willing to fight for. And if you've made it this far, if you've watched Lila go from waitress to savior, to member of a crime family, to finally finding her happy ending, leave a like, share this video, and subscribe to Karma Stories because this is proof that second chances are real, that love can happen in the most unlikely places, that sometimes risking everything is the only way to gain everything. 3 years passed. 3 years since that night in the warehouse. 3 years since Dominic kept his promise and got out of the criminal business, handing his empire over to his second-in-command and disappearing so completely that even the people who once feared him weren't sure if he was still alive. They moved to a small town in Oregon, a place where nobody knew their names, where nobody asked questions about their past. Dominic bought a smaller estate, still luxurious but not ostentatious, and began investing in legitimate businesses, real estate and tech startups, and green. Companies that actually made a difference. And Lila finally followed her dream. She went back to school, completed her nursing program, and now worked at a local hospital where she made a difference every day, where she used her caregiving skills in ways that really mattered. And Emma grew into a confident and happy 8-year-old who loved school and had friends and didn't remember much about that scary night beyond occasional nightmares that faded with each passing year. They became a real family. Dominic adopted Emma officially, and when she first started calling him Daddy, he cried, really cried, something Lila never thought she'd see from such a hard man. And then, on a perfectly normal September day, Dominic showed up at the door with a ring in his hand, a diamond so big, Lila initially thought it was a joke. "Marry me," he said simply. "Officially this time. Be my wife, let me be your husband, and let's spend the rest of our lives proving that people really can change. That love really conquers all, that happy endings aren't just for fairy tales." And Lila, who had started this journey as a lonely waitress just trying to survive, who had risked everything to save a stranger, who had found love in the most unlikely place, said yes without hesitation. The wedding was small, just a few close friends and Emma as maid of honor, wearing a pink dress that made her look like a princess. And when Dominic placed the ring on Lila's finger, when he pulled her into a kiss that made everyone applaud, Emma shouted, "Finally, now we're a real family." And they were. They really were. And if there's a lesson in the story, it's this. Sometimes the best things in life come from the scariest moments. Sometimes you have to risk everything to gain everything. Sometimes saving another person is really how you save yourself. Lila had entered that restaurant thinking her life was over, that she was just counting the days until the weight of her existence finally crushed her. But then she had seen someone who needed help, and she had made the choice to be brave, to be kind, to be more than just a survivor. And that choice had led to a life she never could have imagined, a life full of love and purpose and second chances. Because Dominic wasn't just the man she had saved. He was the man who had saved her back, who had seen value in her when she had forgotten she had any, who had given her the world and asked only for her heart in return. And Emma, God, Emma, had a childhood now. A real childhood with 2 parents who loved her more than anything, with safety and stability and the freedom to just be a kid. So next time you see someone who needs help, someone who's clearly in trouble, remember Lila. Remember that one decision. One moment of courage, one act of kindness can change everything. Not just for the person you're helping, but for you too. Because sometimes saving another person is exactly what you need to find your own way back to life. And leave a comment telling me, would you have saved him? Would you have risked everything for a stranger? Or would you have played it safe and protected yourself? Because these choices define us. These moments when we decide between fear and courage, between indifference and love, between surviving and really living. Lila chose courage, chose love, and gained a family, a purpose, a life worth living. And you can too. All you need to do is be willing to risk, to see, to care, to reach out when your instinct says to pull back. So subscribe to Karma Stories now, because I'm going to keep bringing stories like this. Stories about second chances and unlikely love, and people who prove it's never too late to change. That it's never too late to start over. That it's never too late to find your own happily ever after story. This was the story of Lila and Dominic and Emma. 3 people who shouldn't have fit together, but who created a family stronger than any based on blood could be. A waitress, a former crime boss, and a little girl who brought them together. And they lived happily ever after, not because their life became perfect, but because they had each other. And that was all they needed. Until the next story. Always remember, one act of kindness can change everything. One choice can rewrite your entire destiny. One moment of courage can lead to a lifetime of love. So choose bravely, choose kindly, choose love, and watch how your life transforms in ways you never thought possible.